The vastness of space lay before them, a dark abyss dotted with the faint light of dying stars. An eerie silence enveloped the scene, reminiscent of the calm before a storm, just before the slaughter commenced. Thousands of ships were positioned in formation above Rayan Prime, symbolizing a fragile alliance formed not out of trust, but necessity. High Captain Zorth stood on the command deck of the Sovereign Ra, his claws gripping the cold metal railing as he observed the tactical holographic screen. The Armada was a diverse collection of species, each contributing their unique strengths and designs. Human warships armed with kinetic weaponry and layered shields, Royan dreadnoughts designed for overwhelming firepower, and the sleek, energy-efficient cruisers of the Tari. But would it be sufficient against the Erebus? His gaze shifted to the indomitable human warship, the most formidable in the fleet, standing out with armor as dark as the void, its silhouette resembling a primal beast poised to strike. Captain Elias Grant, the man who had first alerted the galaxy to the impending horror, was aboard that ship, a man who had encountered the Erebus up close and survived to recount the experience. The silence was soon broken. A ripple coursed through space, subtle at first, as if the universe had taken a sharp breath. Then, darkness unfolded. They had arrived. The first Erebus ships did not register on sensors. They did not warp in or emerge from known lanes of space. They simply existed. One moment there was emptiness, and the next their grotesque forms pulsed in the void. Ships or creatures, it was impossible to discern where biology ended and technology began. The surfaces began to twist with living metal as shifting plates formed strange, ever-changing patterns. Some of the ships pulsed with a sickly glow, their hulls adorned with the skeletal remains of those who had come before. Others resembled husks of vessels that had been assimilated, ghost ships twisted beyond recognition. Then they moved. The lead Erebus vessel lunged forward, splitting apart like an unfolding insect, exposing a writhing mass of tendrils tipped with something that glowed an unnatural green. 100 organic lances fired forward, cutting across space like whips of liquid death. "Shields up! Fire all forward batteries!" The command came from a dozen different admirals simultaneously. The void erupted into chaos. The humans fired first. Massive railgun rounds screamed through the dark, impacting the Erebus warforms with the force of a meteor strike. Some found their mark, breaking apart the twisting black armor in bursts of violet flame, while others simply vanished, disintegrated before they could land. The Erebus had already adapted, and dreadnoughts followed suit. Plasma lances cut through the void, scorching through the strange flesh-metal hulls, causing them to convulse as though the ships themselves were alive. Then the Erebus returned fire. The first Tari cruiser never stood a chance. A beam of spiraling energy lanced through its shields like paper, and in an instant, the ship was gone. Not destroyed, but absorbed. Its very matter was pulled into the Erebus vessel like water into a sponge. The screams of its crew echoed over the comms before cutting off. Suddenly, Zorth clenched his fists. This situation was worse than the humans had described. All Dominion vessels maintained their formation, applying pressure on the flanks. The Indomitable surged forward, moving like a predator stalking its prey. The warship unleashed a barrage of kinetic hellfire, with slug after slug crashing into the lead Erebus behemoth. However, the creature ship twisted, learned, adapted, and then achieved the impossible. It opened. The Erebus ship peeled apart into jagged segments, revealing a gaping maw filled with writhing tendrils and churning molten energy. Then, without warning, it lunged. Brace! The Indomitable barely maneuvered in time as the Erebus ship devoured a nearby Union vessel whole, swallowing it and leaving nothing but warped debris. The remains of the ship twisted as if alive, shifting and reshaping into something new, something Erebus. A horrifying realization struck Zorth. They weren't merely destroying ships, they were incorporating them into their own. Target the cores. Do not engage their hulls directly. Grant's voice was calm, but the urgency was unmistakable. They were absorbing energy, firing kinetic strikes at their vitals. Only Zorth snarled. Then let's see how they handle this. The Sovereign Wrath powered up its singularity cannons, ancient weapons from the Dominion's deepest archives. These were not conventional weapons. They did not fire plasma or slugs, but rather the void itself, pockets of collapsing gravity, miniature black holes that devoured anything they touched. The first singularity round was fired, striking the Erebus warform and tearing open a wound in its hull, black tendrils thrashing as the section collapsed. The Erebus emitted a shriek that resonated more as a sensation than a sound, rippling through every open channel. It was injured and could feel pain, yet it did not perish. The wound sealed, and the ship's own flesh rippled, reshaping and hardening. It had already adapted. Zorth cursed, noting that they were learning at a pace faster than anticipated. The battle had only just commenced, yet they were already losing ships by the dozens. The Erebus were unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They did not merely kill, they consumed, assimilated, and grew stronger with each engagement. Then a shift occurred. The Indomitable surged forward, taking reckless risks as it plowed through the wreckage of fallen vessels, disregarding incoming fire. Its forward bays opened, causing Zor's eyes to widen in disbelief. What were they doing? He had witnessed humans utilize railguns and plasma missiles, and had seen their warships dismantle enemy fleets with brutal efficiency. But this was sheer madness. The Indomitable detached entire sections of its own armor, deploying thousands of autonomous drones, each armed with plasma bombs lined with neutron destabilizers, weaponry designed to disrupt molecular cohesion. Fire at will. The drones swarmed the Erebus vessels, detonating within their wounds to prevent regeneration. The Erebus shuddered, their forms losing cohesion as they struggled to adapt. For the first time since the battle commenced, the Erebus retreated. They were not fleeing in panic, rather, they were observing and calculating. They had tested the Alliance's forces and recognized their potential, preparing for their next move. As the Erebus slipped back into the abyss, Zorth exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. They had survived, albeit barely. The fleet had lost a third of its ships, and countless lives had vanished in an instant. He turned to Grant, asking, "They aren't fighting to win, are they?" Grant exhaled, gazing at the black void where the Erebus had disappeared. "No, they are scouting." Silence ensued until Zorth uttered the words neither wished to hear. "Next time, they won't just be testing us. Next time, they will come to finish this." The galaxy was at war. The battle over Royan Prime had merely been the beginning, a brutal skirmish that had left the Alliance fleet shaken but still intact. Yet, as the survivors tended to their wounds, the grim truth loomed over them like a death sentence. The Erebus had learned, and they were returning. Reports flooded in from the outer sectors. Entire colonies had gone silent overnight, and fleets that should have held for weeks were obliterated in mere hours. The Erebus were no longer merely testing their foes. They were assimilating, evolving, and adapting. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant observed the tactical displays with a grim focus. The galactic map before him resembled a horror show, with red zones expanding outward like a malignant cancer. Entire star systems were now marked as contaminated. The war was not just turning against them, they were losing, and they were losing rapidly. The first full-scale Erebus invasion targeted Jan, a heavily fortified Dominion stronghold. 10 battle groups stood ready, comprising humans, Royan, Tari, and several lesser factions, preparing for another engagement akin to Royan Prime. However, this was not Royan Prime. When the Erebus fleet arrived, they did not emerge from warp corridors or through traditional FTL lanes. Manifested as though space itself had folded in on them, spilling their grotesque war forms into the system like an open wound. The Alliance forces opened fire immediately. Plasma beams, railgun rounds, and antimatter torpedoes rained down upon the Erebus ships. The void itself burned, yet the Erebus did not even flinch. Where they had previously adapted over the course of battle, they now adapted in real time, their ships reshaping and twisting before the very eyes of their enemies, becoming impervious to kinetic slugs and redirecting plasma bolts through strange organic lattice structures. By the time the fleet adjusted their tactics, the Erebus were already upon them. The first casualties were not ships, but mines. Somewhere in the midst of the battle, the Erebus unveiled a new horror, a psychic pulse, a silent scream that echoed across every open comm channel. It was not a weapon of destruction, but rather a weapon of corruption. Crew members clutched their heads as their thoughts were invaded by something ancient and hungry. They screamed, convulsed, and then stopped. Their eyes darkened, their bodies stiffened, and then they turned on their own crews. Ship after ship fell silent, their crews overtaken by the Erebus hive mind. They did not merely lose vessels to destruction, they lost them to the enemy. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes. John F. fell. The Erebus did not conquer the planet, they did not destroy it, they absorbed it. The very surface of the world began to shift, black tendrils creeping across the terrain, cities twisting into grotesque alien structures, as if the planet itself had become one of them. And then it was gone. The devastation was complete. Nothing remained but ruins. The Erebus had taken over the entire world, and Jiren F was never seen again. The news spread rapidly, like wildfire. The Erebists were not merely winning, they were consuming everything in their path. The alliance began to fracture, with worlds defecting. Some species fled into the depths of space, abandoning the war entirely, while others turned against their allies, believing that humanity had provoked the Erebus into this conflict. Civil war erupted in sectors that should have united against the threat, and the Erebus continued to expand. On the bridge of the Sovereign Wrath, High Captain Zorth confronted the grim reality of defeat. His people, the Royan Dominion, had ruled vast sectors of space for millennia, enduring invasions, civil wars, and galactic disasters. However, this situation was different. It marked the end. He turned to the holographic figure of Captain Grant, who stood resolute aboard the Indomitable. "We cannot hold, we cannot win, we must flee," Zorth declared. Grant's expression was unyielding. "There is nowhere to retreat to. If we fall back, they will only continue to spread." Zorth bared his teeth, responding, "And if we remain, we die." For the first time in its history, the alliance fractured. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. Some sought to negotiate with the Erebus as if they could bargain with a force that only understood hunger. Others simply disappeared, taking their species and ships into the void, hoping to escape the inevitable. The Erebus then targeted Earth, the heart of human civilization, the birthplace of the species that had first raised the alarm. The greatest fleet ever assembled waited in high orbit, 300 capital ships and thousands of escort craft, with every planetary defense platform armed and prepared, yet it was insufficient. The Erebus did not launch their attack from the void. Instead, they emerged from within the fleet itself. Captured ships, once believed to be lost, suddenly reactivated, their weapons turned inward. Entire battle groups were compromised before they even realized what had transpired. The orbital defense network fired indiscriminately as the Erebus warforms descended toward Earth's surface. They entered the atmosphere like a living plague, with black tendrils spreading across continents, entire cities being absorbed into their ever-expanding mass. The struggle appeared futile, and then the unimaginable occurred. Humanity had one final option, a weapon so catastrophic, so conclusive, that it had never been utilized in recorded history: Project Excalibur. This weapon was designed not to obliterate planets, but to erase them entirely. The last transmission from Earth was a singular command: detonate. In an instant, the planet was no more, not destroyed, not left in ruins, but gone. A void remained where Earth had once existed, a wound in the very fabric of space itself. The Erebus invasion had been halted, but at an immense cost. Humanity ceased to exist as a homeworld species. The indomitable fleet escaped, yet there was no celebration. Humanity had won a single battle, but they had lost everything. The Erebus were still out there, and now they understood that the alliance was desperate. From the shadows of deep space, the remnants of the fleet readied themselves for the final stand. There was no victory left to aspire to, no home to return to. Only one last battle remained, one final mission to ensure that the Erebus would never spread beyond this galaxy, even if it meant burning. Everything has been reduced to ashes: a dying galaxy, a fractured alliance, and an unyielding enemy. The war was lost, yet it continued. The remnants of the once mighty alliance, what remained of humanity, the Royan Dominion, the Tari Protectorate, and a few scattered fleets of other species, had retreated to the furthest corners of space. There was no sanctuary, no safe haven, only the cold, uncharted void where the Erebus had not yet reached. However, survival was not an option. This was not a war that could be endured, but one that had to be concluded. Aboard the battered flagship, Indomitable, the last war council convened. High Captain Zorth, scarred and weary, spoke first. "We cannot win a war of attrition. The Erebus consume, they evolve, they adapt. There is no room for negotiation, no stalemate. This will end in one of two ways: we die, or they do." Captain Elias Grant, the last surviving leader of the Terran fleet, leaned forward. "Then we stop running, we cease retreating, we take the fight to them." Silence ensued as Zorth's golden eyes narrowed. "Suicide," he remarked. Grant offered a bitter smile. "Only if we fail." They had one advantage left, one final desperate opportunity: the destruction of Earth. Earth had inflicted wounds upon the Erebus. It was the first time they had experienced a genuine loss. When humanity detonated Project Excalibur, it had severed a part of their hive mind, as if amputating a limb. The Erebus had reacted, recoiling for the first time, hesitating, which indicated they could be killed. If they struck at the heart of the Erebus, if they located their core intelligence, the entity that directed the swarm, there was a chance, albeit a slim and improbable one. "There is an old human saying," Grant murmured, "sever the head and the body perishes." It was madness, their sole hope. The intelligence reports were fragmented, unreliable, desperate whispers from deep space probes that barely survived long enough to transmit their data. Yet they all indicated one horrifying truth: the Erebus possessed a center, a hive core. It was neither a planet nor a star system. It was a living construct the size of a moon, pulsating with an intelligence beyond comprehension. The source must be destroyed, or the Erebus might endure. Fail, and the last remnants of the galaxy would be consumed. The plan was straightforward: locate the source, breach its defenses, and deliver the weapon. Humanity's ultimate superweapon, the second and final Excalibur warhead, had been developed in secrecy before Earth fell, designed to obliterate existence itself. The warhead could not merely destroy, but unmake. If detonated at the core of the Erebus's mind, they could incinerate the entire swarm from within. A fleet of fewer than 100 ships, the last of the Alliance, set a course for the abyss beyond the known galaxy, heading towards the hive's pulsating heart. The Erebus sensed them long before their arrival. They did not dispatch a fleet to intercept. They did not engage in combat. Instead, the Indomitable and its fleet were drawn into the abyss, into a swirling mass of writhing, blackened space, a region where the laws of physics ceased to apply. The source loomed before them, a monstrous, pulsating entity, not a structure, but a living being larger than any moon, shifting and reshaping itself with unfathomable alien intelligence. Then the whispers began. The Erebus did not communicate in words. They conveyed their thoughts through terror. Through the anguished cries of those they had taken, the voices of the dead permeated the tranquil channels, familiar voices of lost crew members, friends, and family, mocking them. Captain Grant clenched his fists. "Ignore it. Full burn. We're going in." The fleet surged into the storm. The battle was unprecedented. There were no conventional ships, only vast masses of shifting biomass, with tendrils the size of battlecruisers and entire vessels being engulfed by the very space surrounding them. The Indomitable led the charge, weapons firing in all directions, carving a path through the living nightmare. One by one, their ships fell, consumed, and turned against them. Yet they pressed on through the storm, through the chaos, until the source loomed ahead, its pulsing, blackened heart exposed. The Excalibur warhead had to be delivered manually. There would be no escape. Captain Grant stood before his crew, gazing into the faces of those who had followed him to the end. No orders, no speeches, just a nod. He then boarded the last strike craft, the Excalibur-class bomber, carrying the weapon that would bring an end to the war. Zor's voice crackled over the comms. "You do this. There's no coming back." Grant smiled. Never planned to. Then he was gone, diving into the abyss. The source reacted, sensing the threat, writhing and twisting its very form to thwart him. Grant pushed forward through the tendrils, the madness and the screaming voices of the dead. One last push, one final moment. He closed his eyes and whispered, "For Earth, detonation." The universe fell silent. The war was over. The Erebus screamed. A scream echoed throughout the stars, a death cry that trembled the very fabric of space itself. Then they collapsed. Every infected world, every corrupted fleet, every Erebus construct simply vanished. They did not die, they were erased. The remnants of the fleet, barely a dozen ships, floated in the aftermath. A galaxy was saved at the expense of everything. Captain Grant was lost, but his name would forever be remembered. The war had ended, yet the scars would remain. Earth was gone, and humanity was left without a home. The Alliance had perished, but life persisted among the stars. The survivors worked to rebuild. Humanity and its allies transformed into nomads, wanderers traversing the void like the embers of a dying fire. They had one goal, but the galaxy would never return to its former state. In the dark corners of the cosmos, beyond the edge of known space, something observed and awaited.